Good afternoon, and welcome to Many Paths, Many Visions, brought to you by the Labyrinth Society, and with your host, Christiana Brinton. Today, I have as my guest someone who is completely new to me within the international Labyrinth community, and he lives right here in the USA in Florida. His name is Frank Fain, and he is one of the concurrent workshop presenters this year at the gathering. If you are joining us on this GoToMeeting session, please mute your sound by clicking on the microphone icon in the upper left of the GoToMeeting control panel that will appear on your computer screen once you log in. If you call in by phone, you will not see this. You can unmute yourselves and ask questions during the Q&A session at the end of the interview. You can find the GoToMeeting invitation posted on the Labyrinth Society Facebook page, the TLS Facebook Global Group, and on the website under Media. I've entitled this episode, Labyrinths as Safe Containers for the LGBTQ Community, because Frank is a hospice chaplain, musician, spiritual guide, labyrinth facilitator, and writer living in Orlando, Florida, who leads groups and retreats on men's spirituality. Greetings, Frank, and welcome to Many Paths, Many Visions. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here with you today and the folks that are listening.
Well, as I said, you're new to me, but I know other people know you well. But I'm going to act as though there are a lot of people out there who don't know you. And when I have new who I call labyrinthines on this show, who many people have never heard about or met, I like to start off with some basics. So, namely like asking about my guest's own labyrinth journey. And I saw in your bio for your gathering workshop that you are currently working on completing a poetic memoir entitled A Fierce Tenderness, A Gay Man's Journey into the Authentic Masculine. A beautiful title. So I'm going to start by asking, does this journey include your experience with finding and working with labyrinths?
Absolutely. Fierce and tender, or the concept of fierce tenderness, grows out of probably close to 20 odd years of labyrinth experiences, probably more so since about 2013, when I was doing more labyrinth work with another one of the Labyrinth Society, Catherine McLean, when I was involved in some clergy renewal work. And for me, this book and my labyrinth experience are about exploring the balance between both sides of myself and all of myself. The whole concept of fierce tenderness, as it applies to gay men in particular, is we are a unique population. We are this unique blend of masculine and feminine. As the Native Americans would call it, we are two-spirited. You know, we have and our society doesn't always allow us to be both fierce and tender at the same time. So with my labyrinth work, I've been exploring, or been on a journey, I might say, to explore this contrasting, this tension between these two parts. And the labyrinth has helped me do that. And this is a series of poems, reflections that reflect the journey I've been on for some 25 or 30 or more years.
And when did you actually find labyrinths, or when did they find you?
Well, my very first labyrinth experience came back in 1998. I was launching out. I was working as a career counselor and coach, and a friend of mine suggested I go to a local hospital and walk a labyrinth. And immediately that seized my imagination. Something about the path, it was a Chartres-style labyrinth, something about the path just grabbed a hold of me and wouldn't let go. Those seeds. I guess it was about 2008, 2009. I did a little bit more. And in 2013, when I was pastoring a United Church of Christ congregation, I was also involved in some labyrinth work. and I was introduced to Catherine McLean, and we worked together for a number of years on Labyrinths and our clergy renewal project, and that just sort of brought it all together for me. And then in the spring of 2016, after working with Labyrinths for quite a while, I went to training, and I was trained as a facilitator in Jacksonville. And the rest is just sort of taken off from there.
And so this all took place in Florida. This has been your base.
Right. Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, so you are a hospice chaplain.
Well, I was a hospice chaplain. I've since retired from that.
Okay.
Part of that was the economy. My position evaporated not quite a year ago. So I'm no longer doing that. I'm more of a freelance spiritual director and Labyrinth facilitator, as well as right now a student finishing up actually not finishing, but restarting a degree in music that I want to incorporate with my Labyrinth work.
So, but when you were a hospice chaplain, did you use Labyrinths in the service to the community, and was it only?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to jump in. Go ahead.
That's okay. No, well, I just wanted to know. I mean, as a hospice chaplain, were you a chaplain for anyone needing hospice care, or was it specific to the LGBT?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and I worked in two different hospice organizations, and I did have the good fortune in both of the hospice organizations I worked with to work with folks who were GLBTQ folks.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did HIV/AIDS work back in the late 80s and early 90s, I had a chance to work with LGBTQ folks. I didn't use Labyrinths back then, but I've been working with that population for a good number of years. And I did use Labyrinths, and I found finger labyrinths for people who are on that final journey, toward transition to the next life, or to whatever they think of as the next life. Labyrinths were very helpful, both for helping them evaluate their journey, calming some anxieties, and helping them put their lives in some kind of final perspective.
Did you find working with GLBTQ patients who were in hospice as compared to people who are not of that sector, were the issues the same? I mean, by the time you're in hospice care, does everything else fall away, and the issues are still core issues for everyone, or was there a difference? Was there?
That's an interesting question, and that could be a whole separate conversation. Some of the core issues are the same about where am I going, what was my life worth, the sense of closure, the sense of where am I with the divine, with the creator of the universe, and all of those questions are essentially the same. But I think they take on a different quality and character with LGBTQ folks. And I can't speak for the other. I can speak specifically for gay men, especially gay men who were sick with HIV, AIDS, or cancers, or diseases like those. There's still, even in the years that I worked with it, there's still something about being and I'm going to use this term in a descriptive way, about being a sexual minority and dying, that brings up a lot of issues, especially if one's dying from a sexually transmitted disease. And so there were a lot of shame and guilt issues, a lot of issues with families, a lot of issues about, I wish I would have, what did I do to deserve this? A lot of issues that surround the particular disease and the cause of death. So there are some key differences, yes.
Mm-hmm. And did you ever find any resistance to the use of labyrinths, or were you just careful introducing them to patients? You sort of sort of felt them out to see if they would accept it as a means of handling these issues, or creating a space where it was safe to deal with the issues.
Well, I think labyrinths, if introduced as a exploratory, as a reflective tool, that I found very little resistance. One story in particular, there was a woman who had she had some severe mental health issues, and she also had some strokes which basically were killing her. She was in hospice, and she had a lot of anxiety and fear about dying, and was a very anxious person. And I used a simple classic finger labyrinth with her, and she just found that to be very, very helpful to her. And even when I did some work with some Alzheimer's patients, simple labyrinths, tracing patterns and feeling a sense of completion, even though I often had to guide their hands and work with them, became a very, very powerful tool in working with people who are terminally ill and dying.
And I have one other question about the types of labyrinths you use. Did you have to, because you were in a hospice setting, did they have to be plastic, or so because they had to be germ free, and that, did you have to be careful about the actual physical material that you brought in, or could you bring in wooden labyrinths? Did it matter at that point?
Well, basically what I used is, because I was mobile, I visited facilities. I did not go into homes. So basically I often would bring paper and pencil labyrinths, and we might do them with paper and pencil or crayons, or I would bring in a paper labyrinth that was in a plastic sheet protector, and we would trace with fingers or a pencil eraser. So those are the things I use, because those are much more portable. And if something happens to them and it gets messed up, or something happens, you can just replace those very easily. And that and there's really no risk management or infection control issue with that. That's one of the reasons why I did it that way. I didn't have to face any of those other issues you just mentioned.
Got it. And the hospice people, did you have to clear it with them, or were they totally supportive, or?
Both of the hospices I worked in were extremely supportive. As a matter of fact, at the hospice I recently left, almost a year ago, the director of spiritual care encouraged us to do that. And he did not know at the time that I was a labyrinth facilitator, and I grabbed on to his approval and ran with it. So I found a great deal of support. The hospice I worked for in South Florida had a mini, I think it was a mini Chartres style, if I remember correctly, paved labyrinth just outside its office. So they were very supportive of labyrinth use.
So how about with your men's groups and retreats? You've incorporated labyrinths into these workshops and retreat sessions?
Yes. And for me, labyrinths are a wonderful way to provide a safe, and I'm going to use some concepts that I'll elaborate. I think labyrinths are a wonderful way to create a safe container to help men of all kinds reflect on their journeys, reflect on where they are, how they might have gotten here, where they might want to go differently. And the other thing that I think is so wonderful about labyrinths with men particularly, it takes them out of their heads and into their experience. And for me, that's one of the wonderful values of the labyrinth for men. Because as men, we tend to be analytical, we tend to be rational. It's a problem to be solved. And a labyrinth is not a problem to be solved. The labyrinth is an experience that changes every time you do it. So And so that's one of the reasons why I do them, and I do them in different ways each time I lead a retreat.
Oh, you do? Okay. Is that based on the theme or
Yes. Yeah.
okay.
Yes. Yeah. It's based on the theme. It's based on the group. It's based on, you know, where the energy in the room is.
So
So, I mean,
do you bring a bunch of different labyrinths with you, canvas ones, and I mean, how do you sort of know
generally
before?
what I've done in men's retreats I've done where labyrinths have figured as significant parts. Generally, I bring a canvas labyrinth because usually they're done indoors. And usually when I do them, I usually use a Chartres style because I like the geometry of the Chartres style. So I use a Chartres style and I use a canvas labyrinth, and we do it indoors. Several times we've done them by candlelight. We've done them in various different ways. In one particular retreat I did with men, it was at a church conference center up in Highlands, North Carolina, and they had a wonderful stone pathway, classic labyrinth in a wooded area with an altar in the middle. It's a Unitarian Universalist camp, and that was pretty interesting. And we were outside in, I think, the mid-afternoon on a fall day. So that's another way that I've done it. So and the setting varies with the retreat.
Mm-hmm. And can you share some of the responses that you've gotten from men who have never walked before, and who do you only do you provide this throughout the retreat, or is it on one specific time, or are the men able to walk it whenever they want to?
Okay.
I got a bunch of questions.
Yeah. Well, let me kind of clarify that for you because that's a multifaceted question, and it's
Yeah.
a good question. The labyrinth experiences that I usually provide at men's retreats are programmed into the whole retreat. Oftentimes, I'm not the only facilitator. I am one of the facilitators, and the labyrinth experience is a key component of the experiences that I do. And so what I do is, for example, and this is kind of leading into talking about my presentation, because my presentation at the gathering is actually reporting on 3 very significant experiences I've done in the last 2 years. For example, I've been involved with a national men's group called the Mankind Project for a number of years. And they have a subset of that called the Rainbow Warrior Gathering, which is made up of all gay, bisexual, or queer men. And they have an annual gathering. And this was back in 2016. It was about 2 years ago. Yeah, this was 2 years ago. Yes. I'm not good at math. Sorry. And one of the things that the Mankind Project works on is the integration of sexuality and spirituality. And this is something I use the Labyrinth for. And the Labyrinth experience I did was I had we went into a big room, and this was done as the sun was setting. And this was called Your Erotic Journey. And what it was I led the men in a brief guided meditation about where are you in embracing your full sense of your sexuality as a gay man, your being your erotic self. Where are you on that journey? What is it you need? What is it you need to leave behind? And I'm going to take a risk and be somewhat explicit here. I hope this does not disturb your listeners. But one of the things that I invited the men to do is, if they wanted to express leaving behind, I invited them to remove as much or as little of their clothing as they chose to to be in a place of vulnerability
mm,
and release. And I have to tell you, that particular labyrinth walk, it took about 2 hours from start to finish. There were 35 men that came to it. I had a gentleman who was playing Native American flute. It was candlelit. And of the 35 men, I would say 95% were shed most of their clothing, and they all reported experiencing a tremendous sense of freedom and a tremendous release of some shame and some sense of community about embracing their sense of who they were as an erotic sexual being, as a man. Because gay men often compartmentalize their sexuality and their spirituality. It's like, I can't be a sexual being. There's something wrong with me doing that. And this labyrinth experience helped them find some healing in terms of expressing that as an integral part of who they were. It was a very powerful experience. Very powerful experience for the men that did that workshop.
Yeah, I as a heterosexual woman, it's just, and I was in the theater world for years, and so I had gazillion of friends in the LGBTQ community in New York, and but I take my eroticism and my association, my acceptance of that, integral with my spirituality, so for granted. And this,
Right.
you're bringing this up, and it's really like, oh my God, how hard it must be, devastatingly hard, to not be able to be free with that, and have it just be a no-brainer. Like, it's just, that's, as a human, how can you? And I can't even imagine. So it must have been a very powerful experience.
Well, let me share one story with you. One of the things that I did is I had a bowl of water in the middle, and I had a whole batch of rainbow-colored stones around. And I said, I invited the men to, if they were going to leave something behind, to pick up one of the rainbow stones, and as a symbolism, drop it in the water. Or if they were picking up something that they needed, they could take the stone and take it with them as a talisman, as a memento. Well, there was this one man who was a fitness instructor, and I think he was also a massage therapist from New York. And I held space. I did not walk in this particular. Sometimes when I do a retreat, I will walk at the very end to be part of the community. In this one, I chose not to, and I held space. And I wandered around, and as each of the men came back off of the labyrinth, returned back, I very gently put my hand on the shoulder and I said, "Welcome home, brother." I said that I did a welcoming back kind of blessing. And this one young man came, and he just grabbed a hold of me and cried on my shoulder for what must have been 5 minutes.
Oh.
Just blew me away. And the next day, and I asked him, "Is there anything you would like to share?" And he just sort of shook his head, no. And the next day he came up to me and we had this conversation, and I'm going to summarize the conversation. And he said, "Frank, here's your stone back." I said, "No, you can keep it." "No," he says, "I want to give it back to you as a gift of gratitude. You gave me permission now to be a pilgrim, to find myself on my journey. No one's ever done that before," he said. And that made the whole experience, that was just extremely powerful for that man to tell me that. That just cemented this work for me. And I've had similar experiences like that with men as they've experienced the transformative power of the labyrinth in a particular setting.
Yeah, because most men, I mean, unless they're massage therapists, maybe, or doing that kind of work where they are physically healing, and doing healers, they don't embody this type of healing methodology. I mean, it's as you said before, the men tend to be very, brain oriented, thinking oriented. How do we get to our goal oriented, left brain people. And so the shift must be quite profound when they have the opportunity to embody this pilgrimage of going inward and being open and coming back out again into their lives.
Well, I think also, too, part of what happens on the labyrinth is they begin to discover that I am a unique individual as a gay man.
mm,
Um, the other two labyrinth experiences I'm going to report on at the gathering are as I'm involved with a gay men's spirituality group called Gay Spirit Visions out of Atlanta. And a couple of years ago, no, a year ago, excuse me, a year ago, I was a presenter at their conference in North Carolina. And I did a labyrinth experience they have a classic sort of stone path labyrinth that I mentioned earlier. And the theme of the conference was called Pariah Magic, the gift of the outsider. For many gay men, actually for most gay men, actually, I wouldn't say many, for most gay men, we struggle with this sense of being outside the mainstream, and, we're outsiders, but we have gifts to give. And the labyrinth experience that I did with a group of men that particular afternoon is the labyrinth has a wonderful dynamic of you're outside, you go into the center, and you come back out. And the dynamic of the walk that we did was, as you go, and we talked about what are your unique gifts, what is inside of you as a gay man that is authentic that you want to bring out to the outside world and give, even though the outside world sometimes labels you as an outsider to the mainstream. And again, that was a powerful transforming experience, because these men began to see that as a gay man, yes, they are different, but their difference is the gift to themselves and a gift to the world, even if the world is going to treat them as an outsider. So the labyrinth helps them create that sense of giftedness, that sense of I'm a unique individual, and that's okay. And that's very powerful. It's a very powerful experience. I know of no other holistic experiential methodology that helps gay men begin to focus on that and begin to say, oh, I'm really okay and my journey is okay.
And do they
if you
the other sense, though, that as a facilitator, there is what we talk about it, and that when you turn the paths, you go no matter if it's a classic or a cretin or a shard or a whatever kind of labyrinth, you get thrown to the outside. And this sense of still being connected, even though you're on the outside, you're at the very, you're in the center, and then you're thrown to the outside, and you're on the very outside path. Does that also impact how gay men think of themselves in terms of spirit, of their spiritual journey? That they're not cut off, they're not separate. They are part of all that is all the time, even if they are treated as outsiders or on the fringes.
I think that's the power. I think you're echoing what I think I said before, is that the labyrinth is an experiential, as an experience, is a journey. that helps them viscerally begin to understand that paradox that they live all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what the Labyrinth does is it helps them internalize, even if it's just for that particular moment, that sense of, yes, that paradox is okay. Now the question and the challenge becomes, how do I manage that tension in a way that's life affirming?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that becomes the challenge. And I certainly encourage men to reflect on that. And some of fierce tenderness, as it's developing even more, will be, how do I manage that sense of fierce tenderness? That both and. It's not an either or, it's a both and. And see, as gay men, we sometimes think, well, I'm either this or I'm that. And the reality is, it's a both and.
And it's something that they face every day. I mean, it's a 24/7 thing. It's not something that
Right.
it's an occasional thing. It's something that is an integral part of their life on a daily basis.
Absolutely. You know, a good case in point is, I, you know, and a heterosexual couple can be on the street, they can embrace and kiss one another. Two gay men who are married in a relationship, they kiss on the street. Oh my, immediately that eyebrows raise. In some places, not as much as they used to, but still, there's that outsider status there. And so, how do you manage that paradox of this is okay in the midst of a world that says sometimes it's not okay? And I think that, and the Labyrinth helps folks do that.
Yeah, or we don't want to know about it. We don't want to see it. We don't want it to be so obvious.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. As long as it's hidden, it's okay. But we don't want it to be so obvious. Yeah.
Yeah. And yet the reality is, though, make this point. I have a good friend, Ray Rigeloso. He wrote a book called Gay Men and the New Way Forward. And he and I did a Labyrinth at one of his celebrating gay manhood workshops. That was the third format I'm going to explore in my presentation. And he talks about gay men have 14 distinct gifts. And when you stop and think about it, we balance masculine and feminine intelligence. We are the keepers of beauty. We are, we are the hairdressers, the artists, the musicians. We restore the old neighborhoods. We are often spiritual reformers. We're often leaders in equality between men and women, all kinds of things. And one of the things that Labyrinths do is help gay men identify those gifts and begin to live out those gifts in the context of the larger world. And I think that we see, the larger society sees what gay men do, but we're still a long way to society at large understanding that gay men have a unique evolutionary perspective and a unique evolutionary role to play in society. I can testify. I've lived a long time. I've got senior citizen status. We'll let it go at that. I've lived through since Stonewall and beyond, and even with all of the advances that we've made, we're still a long way from the kind of equality that I would love to see. And I think the Labyrinth can be a tool for helping to build that and build community where that sense of equality can be very visible and very visceral.
So we're talking about acceptance, but in the communities that you've worked with in Florida in this way, using Labyrinths, has there been any barriers or issues to the acceptance of Labyrinths?
No, I don't think so. And also, just to clarify, all three of the most of the Labyrinth work I've done, most of the general Labyrinth work I've done has been in Florida. Mm-hmm. Probably the three most pivotal experiences I've done have all been, one was done in upstate New York, one was done in Indiana at a campground in Indiana, and the third one was done in North Carolina. So most of that's been out of state. Some of the individual work has been done here, but and it doesn't matter where the gay men are. The issues are the same, and some gay men have a little bit of trouble, with this. It's experiential. It's, anytime you introduce a transforming experience and you ask people to, to think about the narrative of their lives and take a journey to examine that and maybe start to rewrite that, that is threatening. But my experience has been that very few of the men that have gone to, I've done Labyrinth work, have, once it's over, they've all been very appreciative of the experience. Some get more out of it than others, and that's understandable, just like with any Labyrinth experience. Some people, it takes them a while to get into it. It's one of those things that the more you do it, the more you know, the more transforming it becomes. But I wouldn't say I've encountered a lot of resistance. Not at all. Not at all.
Well, let's talk about your workshop presentation. The title is Gathering the Seeds at Our Center, Labyrinth Walks with Gay Men for Discovering Their Authentic Selves and Gifts. So what is, you referred to this a number of times, but what's the format of your presentation? What will be the format?
Well, basically, we're going to do, I'm going to do basically three things. I'm going to talk a little bit about, it's basically going to be experiential. There's going to be a little bit of didactic in it, because in any presentation there has to be, I think. But we're going to talk about how do you create Labyrinth experiences for this particular population? Because yes, they are the same, but there are some differences. And we'll talk a little bit about that, about building a safe container, about confidentiality. Like you asked me for pictures, and I don't allow picture taking at any of my events, deliberately so, because sometimes there are men there that aren't out. There are men there that are I don't want to do anything that's going to make the men that are at my events uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable with picture taking. I just don't think at a Labyrinth event of this kind it's appropriate. It's my personal feeling. And we're going to talk about what are some of the different ways and formats that you can use. Each of the workshops I've done has had a slightly different format, and some of that's based on the theme, some of that's based on the audience, some of that's based on time of day. What's the goal of this particular walk? Is it just a general walk? Is it part of a retreat? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the other thing we're going to talk a little bit about is how do you create safe space? What is safe space for a gay man on a Labyrinth walk? And I think it's very similar to what safe space is for all of us, but it is a sensitivity to the baggage that gay men are going to bring to something like this. Because if you've got a group of gay men and you're doing a Labyrinth work with a group of gay men at a retreat, you've got a whole range of experiences and things. For example, one of the issues that came up in the one at the Rainbow Warrior Gathering, and one man shared with us at the end when we did a little bit of group processing, he felt a tremendous amount of shame in being gay that he could not verbalize. And when he was able, he did the he did the walk without his clothes, and he said at the end he felt a tremendous release from shame, taking off his clothes and doing this in the company of men he knew and trusted, because of the format of the weekend that this was involved in, freed him from some shame. And I just thought that was very powerful. I mean, the whole group just affirmed him for that. So there's a lot of internalized shame and homophobia among a lot of gay men that you wouldn't think is there. And so how do you build that space where they can be who they are? They can explore not only their sexuality, but they can see how their sexuality is embedded in the rest of their lives, in their spirituality, in all kinds of ways. And oftentimes we want, as gay men, we want to segment our sexuality from the rest of our lives. And I don't think you can do that. I think that our sexuality is embedded in all of who we are. And when we can accept that and celebrate that, and celebrate how that is a positive force for life, then, you know, that's part of creating community. And I think Labyrinth experiences with gay men help to do that.
So you referred to, I've since Stonewall, you've seen it all. You've been through the AIDS epidemic, 30 years, and what the AIDS epidemic created, which was definitely more support organizations, definitely some concurrent healthcare and legal improvements, but you pointed out so there continues to be stigmas attached to being gay and being authentic. Not compartmentalizing your sexuality, allowing it to be a part of who you are. But what are the differences now that gay men face now as compared to 20 years ago? I mean, and how is this showing up in the younger men who attend these Labyrinth retreats?
Well, I think there's a fear, and I'm going to get political here because there's no way around it. Given our current political climate, many of the gains that we have made are slowly being eaten away by a rise in homophobia and religious fundamentalism, which makes my blood boil. You know, I could use some stronger words, but I won't. And so I think a lot of younger gay men are concerned about that. And I also think that one of the things that our society has done about sexuality in general is, while our sexuality is an integral part of who we are, we tend to, I'm trying to think of the right word, we spotlight that in ways that are unhealthy. I'll give you a case in point. I'm an older gay man, and when I'm out in the gay community, I'm not young and cute and pretty, okay? So that all of a sudden, I'm damaged goods. And there's a lot of that still goes on. I think the same thing happens in the heterosexual community, but not quite as much. In the gay community, there is a disproportionate emphasis on physicality, on your sexuality, rather than how are you being gay as a total part of who you are as a person. See, our sexuality is not just about how we make love and who we love and what we do in the bedroom. Our sexuality is about that total sense of how we integrate all parts of our being. And I think part of it is learning how to be authentic and discovering that because I am a non-procreative, my sexuality is non-procreative, then that makes things different. How do I incorporate that? And that's still a struggle for a lot of gay men. And to be honest about who we are. And I just think that, you know, and recognizing the gifts, we don't see ourselves as gifted. We still have a lot of self-esteem issues. I ran a group with a friend of mine called Living Out Your Gifts for a year. And we had a group of gay men from across the spectrum. And one of the most interesting things that happened in that particular group was that a lot of the gay men said, you know, I never thought of myself as gifted. I never thought that being gay itself is a gift to myself and a gift to the world. And so I think the Labyrinth work I've done is a part of that. And this presentation is a beginning to say gay men have unique gifts to give the world and each other.
I wanted to get back to your the workshop. Gathering the seeds at our center. What do you mean by that? What's the symbolism
Well,
with that?
I think it goes back to part of what I just said is that if if I can affirm that as a gay man, that being gay is a gift,
Okay.
what is that seed? What is that gift that I can give to myself and to the world as a gay man? Is it my sense of social justice? Is it my creativity? Is it my ability to be in relationships? Is it my spirituality? What is that I can give? And what is the journey I can take to actualize that gift to myself and to the world?
Okay.
And so that's a seed, that gift of being authentic to who I am and recognizing those gifts is a seed that can grow into something else.
And what is your take on these younger people who refuse to be labeled and call themselves gender fluid?
I think that's a choice they make. I mean, they're not categorizing themselves. I have no problem with that. I think some of that is a reaction to the categories and labels that our society has put, because we need to put things in neat little boxes. You're male, you're female, you're gay, you're straight. You're Catholic, you're Protestant, you're Jew. I mean, we have all kinds of sophisticated ways to label ourselves. Sometimes those labels become descriptive, but oftentimes they become proscriptive. And I think a lot of the younger people are reacting to the proscriptive labels. I don't want to be labeled.
But do you think if they do you think it's going to be harder, because you make a point of here the being gay and being a gift, but if these younger people resist being labeled and resist compartmentalizing their beingness, who they are, do you think that they will have a more difficult time accepting themselves as gifts to the world, as gifts?
No, I know, because they're choosing, their gift is to say, don't label me. I'm me. Accept me as who I am. If I'm choosing to be a gay man and I choose to identify as a gay man, that doesn't mean that if another man wants to say I'm queer or gender fluid, that's fine. That's their gift, and I can honor that gift. You see, one of the things about gay men, one of the unique gifts about gay men that comes out of my friend Ray's work, is that we're able to be in non-competitive relationships with women, and sometimes some of my best friends are women. I have lots of big sisters who I love dearly. I never had big sisters as a kid, but I got lots of big sisters now. And so we bring a gift by being who we are. They bring a gift by being who they are. I'm not saying that there are those men who are going to naturally have an affinity to identify as gay. I've had some queer men and I've had some gender neutral men who have been at my workshops. They get just as much out of it as those men who identify totally as gay. It's a spectrum. They have their gifts to bring too. And so part of this is creating the environment where, however we see ourselves, however we choose to integrate our sexuality and the rest of us using the labyrinth, that's a seed, that's a gift. They have a much broader perspective. And some of them I really admire. Some of them I think are reactive, and I think over time may choose to modify their perception. But right now they're reacting to societal forces and to some of the categorization that doesn't feel right to them. And more power to them.
But you did mention before that there is within the gay community, within the LGBT community, you mentioned like you're not a pretty young thing anymore. There's a somewhat of a within the community. Is there a stigma or labeling within the community if people call themselves gender fluid and choose to go in many different directions depending on their interests and at the time, or what they want to experience or express at the time? Is there the same kind of issue there, or has that dissipated in the last 20 years?
I think I kind of think the way I would refer to that is I think that's a growing edge in the LGBTQ community. And we're not a perfect community like any other community. And I hesitate to use the word community because I'm not sure I know what that means when I apply that alphabet soup to that variety of sexual expressions. But I think it's a growing edge. And part of what I'll put this in more of a personal terms, as I've aged, I've had to realize that some people are, make decisions based on looks and different kinds of things. Okay, that's not my issue. I do know that that's all, even in the larger world, we make decisions on appearances. But one of the things I have learned is if I base my relationships solely on appearances and on beauty, which fades, outward beauty, then inward beauty, that affirmation of my authenticity is what's beautiful, not what I look like on the outside. And part of the Labyrinth journey is validating what's going on inside of me. Yeah, outside I may look like I'm falling apart, and that's okay, but inside I'm still young and beautiful. So I think the Labyrinth journey has helped me and helped some of the men I've worked with begin to take a look at that and look at how gifted they really are. And to see some of the men, to see the radiance of these men from inside out is mind-boggling sometimes. I mean, I just find that very mind-boggling, and I love it. I mean, this work, I'm sure you can tell I get excited and passionate about this work. This work is done, for me, this work is opened me up to a world and to things in myself that I never would have been opened up to before. And I've helped others open up to things through this work. That's why I do it. No other reason. Also, it's fun.
Yeah. It definitely gives you a reason for being and getting up in the morning, and it is very joy filled, I guess.
Yes.
Often. But I have another question. So I was in a prison labyrinth ministry for years and helped facilitate it. And the incarcerated, and this was a medium maximum security state prison in Oregon. And they often commented that once they began participating on a regular basis with the labyrinth walks, and these were a couple of times a month, they recognized the other women from throughout all the different cells on the walks, and they, because they felt that this was a safe container, we created a safe container for them to walk. They felt safe with these women outside the labyrinth space as well. Over time, they started to actually be a community even when they weren't walking the labyrinth. Is this something you've experienced with the men in your groups, or is this what you're maybe trying to help the participants in your workshop experience, that there's a broader application to the experience that they get within the space that they are creating for themselves on the outside. I think this is what you were pointing to.
Yeah. Short answer is yes and yes, but the my experience suggests to me that at all of the retreats that I've done with the Labyrinth, something happens to the men when they leave the Labyrinth experience as they go back into the larger community of the retreat experience. They feel safer, they feel something has happened that they take with them. And my goal is to create, at some point, to create here or elsewhere a sense of beloved community, to borrow Martin Luther King's term and borrow some of the work of Catherine McLean, who's done a lot of work on the Labyrinth as a tool for beloved community. Is it draws us together and it builds community. And this is a goal of mine in this work long term. How to achieve that work, I'm not 100% sure, because unfortunately in many localities, gay men, the LGBT community lives in the context of a larger community. And oftentimes when we come together, within our sexual identification soup, to use that term, we don't often gather. We usually gather for political or social things. We don't often gather for Labyrinth kinds of events. And I'm looking at trying to create some events on a regular basis for that community. So it's something that I hope to be able to do. It's a little more difficult to do in the prison ministry. You have somewhat of a captive audience.
Yes.
I mean, literally a captive audience. So, but I have seen on smaller scales, I have seen that sense of community, that sense of safety, that sense of, wow, this is really cool. Yeah. And that sense of relating. On another note, I am going to be doing some work to create community among college students at Rollins College, where I'm a student now. I'm working with the chaplain there, and we're beginning to develop some relationships with other colleges, and I think we'll see some of that. And I hope to do some Labyrinth work with some of the gay student groups there on campus, and that may be a place to begin to explore that in the future.
Well, you mentioned the formats. You mentioned 3 possible formats for facilitating workshops like these. So by developing these formats, have you had people come to you requesting, listen, I want to do this in my community, I want to do this or my state, and so by developing these formats, is this a way of helping the greater LGBTQ community?
Oh, absolutely.
So you can actually have something to provide them to use their own workshops.
Absolutely. That's why I'm going to be presenting these 3 different. Basically, it's taking the 3 different, I guess I would say, keystone types of Labyrinth walks I've done in the last 2 years with gay men, and talking about them and saying these are 3 possible, themes, for doing walks with this community. Those themes have a lot of different nuances and ways that they could be massaged and manipulated, for a particular group. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I would be delighted if someone comes up to me at the gathering and says, would you come to such and such a place and do this? Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I just think that, and part of my goal with this presentation is to begin to branch out and using the Labyrinth to build more inclusive community. Both, I mean, the Labyrinth is such a wonderful community building tool, within specific communities and within the wider community at large. And so that's my goal.
Yeah, because I mean, if you do another example, Janice Lewis has created an actual manual with formats to use to help facilitate workshops in other community locations like hers that she is involved with in Chicago Lights, and now has a workbook that then can be taken to other communities to help facilitate the same type of programs that exist that she's involved with.
Right.
So,
and that's certainly something I've given some thought to doing as well. This workshop is essentially the first step. I've been asked by the folks at Veritas to do a webinar for them on my work with gay men. So, I mean, so there is interest in this topic.
Great. Well, that leads that, and I haven't stopped for Q&A because the person who was on left. So I'm just continuing with the conversation. We've run over a little tiny bit, but I got one more question for you, Frank,
Sure.
if you don't mind.
Sure.
So speaking to this, if we are to truly sow seeds for the future, how can the worldwide Labyrinth community support a broader use of labyrinths within this public sector? Do you have any suggestions?
Well, I think the fact that we're doing this, I'm doing this workshop at this gathering is certainly one giant step. And I think it is reaching out, finding ways within the Labyrinth community to reach out with the Labyrinth to populations that may not have it. Like Clive is beginning to look at some alternative training models to train people from other countries who don't have the time or the resources to go to the training that is often provided for Labyrinth facilitators. I mean, it's expensive and time consuming. I mean, so that, it's really about figuring out how to get the message of the Labyrinth and its transformational power to communities. I think I've been doing that in some specific ways and in some specific communities. And I think the openness of the Labyrinth Society to build that sense of inclusivity. I mean, I know one of the goals of the Labyrinth Society over the next several years is building a more inclusive community and reaching out to young adults. And that's part of the work that I'm doing at Rollins. I've been talking with Carol Maurer about a special project to do the Labyrinth work that we're doing at Rollins. And so, I'm confident, I feel confident that work is going to come to some fruition. So, I mean, it's a matter of recognizing the need, and then as the need arises and people are there with the ideas and the skill sets to saying, okay, let's do this. And sometimes that's funding, sometimes that's support, sometimes that's time. It just depends on how it all comes together. Because the Labyrinth is such a powerful tool for personal and communal transformation. I mean, the possibilities are enormous in my mind.
As you're speaking, Frank, I'm thinking in terms of, and I just had a podcast with Maya Scott, and Lars Howlett is going to be next week. To me, it's like, well, how can we create a committee that will actually look at accessibility issues and reaching underserved areas of the public in a more substantial, impactful way than we have before. And I'm wondering if you and the people who like Maya and yourself and people who are really involved and committed to switching or switching the whole conversation about inclusivity and up a notch. This could involve Veritas and TLS, that it is an inclusive organization and an inclusive committee. And we look at how can we do this on a worldwide basis? How can we support? What kind of things can we implement across the board that will make this conversation come alive and make this relevant in the future?
Well, one of the things I think that would be interesting to do, and this would be a committee, is I think if you're looking at trying to serve some populations you're not serving, I think drawing together a group of individuals, and I'd certainly be glad to serve with that group, and maybe planning an event where we try to bring together individuals from some of these communities that may or may not know about the Labyrinth and begin to educate them about the value of the Labyrinth in building community and in serving their community. I'll give you a good case in point. Rollins College is dedicated to a very strong policy of non-discrimination and full inclusion of groups across the racial, ethnic, religious, socioeconomic plane. And I've been involved on the fringes in some conversations about the inclusion of some more conservative evangelical fundamental organizations in the Christian sphere of things, who have a tendency to discriminate against certain groups of people, LGBT community in mind. And I was speaking with the vice president for the college recently, and I had suggested to her that maybe, one of the things that we need to always be aware of, that every group has a right to its beliefs and its system, but it does not have the right to deny somebody else to be who they are. And I had suggested to her that in the conversation for building community among these widely divergent, groups, maybe we need to schedule a Labyrinth walk and have these groups participate in a Labyrinth walk to take a look at, yes, everybody has a right to be on their individual journeys, however that may be, but where is our common center, and how can we be on our individual journeys and yet take a journey together toward the common good within the context of the college? And she thought that was an interesting idea. And then again, I think that's an illustration of the use of the Labyrinth.
Yeah, and that's certainly been used in that way. And for instance, in Eastern Europe, it was used years ago after the war there, Serbian war, with young people. I knew of someone who took the Labyrinth over there and had young people from both sides who had families decimated, and the girls had been raped repeatedly, and they were, technically arch enemies, but they learned to walk the path together, and they learned that they were, there wasn't any difference under the skin of how this tragedy affected them, and the effects of this war, and that they learned about, and they called it afterward. They called it, during this, it was a week or 2 week program, a path to peace. Right. And it became a path to peace for these young people who had been so profoundly affected by this, the war, the years of strife and mayhem and genocide. And so they this was a way of understanding that that this idea of respecting and being respectful was something that they could actually embody as they were walking, and it became an embodiment for them as they were walking this together. So it certainly has been done in other ways for years now. So I think that's a great idea.
The reconciliation labyrinths that were done in South Africa a number of years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, Frank, this has been wonderful. I mean, I would love to just, I could talk about things like this, I live in Texas, so there's a wide spectrum of people here on both ends of the religious, with conversion therapy and inclusivity, and you got everything in between, and I belong to a group that is very inclusive, Center for Spiritual Living. So, we have Labyrinth walks there frequently. So there is a way to, and it's a very diverse group. It's a very diverse community that attends these events and attends all the services, and color, ethnicity, gender, whatever, sexual, you name it. And so it's I think that this is an important something that we really need to look at for the future in terms of, the labyrinth is sort of now we know that it works. We know that it's a value. We know that it works in many different situations and in many different communities and under many different circumstances. So it's not something that is questioned anymore, for the most part. So yeah, I would love to see some kind of committee formed to look at these and invest and come up with some ideas for the organizations that exist, but also for local community organizations and for ways of creating local labyrinth organizations in all different areas of the world that will be.
I think that would be great.
Yeah. Well, this has been wonderful, Frank. Thank you so much. I can't wait to see you at the gathering. I think I have seen you in Florida Were you were at the Florida gathering?
I don't think so.
Okay. But how about Houston, or were you at Bainbridge Island?
No, I have not been. This will be my first gathering.
Okay.
That I've been. Yeah, I've been on the fringes for a while, and I bit the bullet, and I'm doing it this time.
Oh. So. Well, that's great. I'm so looking forward to meeting you there, and I hope you have a fabulous time, and it's everything that you want it to be, and so looking forward to talking with you and meeting you in person.
That'd be great. I look forward to. There's a lot of people I'm looking forward to meeting that I've had conversations with over the last 6-8 months. So it'll be great.
Yeah. So it has been such a pleasure sharing this hour with you, and thank you so much for joining me today. And many continued blessings on your path, and have a wonderful week or week and a half. Much time do we have? Not too much longer. 2 weeks?
About 2.5 weeks.
It's going to go fast. It's going to go quickly.
Yeah, I have a lot of work to do to get ready, so I know I'm aware of the calendar.
Okay. All right. Well, you have safe travels, and see you soon. And many continued blessings on your path. Thank you for joining me today.
Okay. I'm going to sign off now. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Okay.
Okay. Take good care.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.
So you've been listening to the Labyrinth Society's Many Paths, Many Visions on GoToMeeting, and broadcast by Spreaker with your host, Christiana Brinton. Be sure to check the Labyrinth Society website media area, our Facebook page, the global group, YouTube, and Google Plus for a list of upcoming dates and guests. Also, if this podcast has piqued your interest in the Labyrinth Society and you'd like more information about membership, please go to www.labyrinthsociety.org/membership. Ciao, namaste, and may you find what you need on your path through life.